We are, of course, recording today's webinar on the state of PPA management, market shifts, and the next wave of innovation. And I am so thrilled today to be joined by my colleague, Sam Cotterall, and industry analyst from Verdantix, Gus Brewer, for today's session. Before I transition over to those guys, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being streamed on LinkedIn Live, we hope, if all things are going well. And so if you're tuning in from LinkedIn, we can't really see who's on the call, but if you don't mind dropping where you're dialing in from into the comment section, we'd love to see some engagement and see who's joining us on LinkedIn. It really helps us to understand our reach, so thank you for doing that. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available on verse.inc, our website, within 24 hours of the final recording. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Zoom webinar Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen and submit those questions to us. I'll be reviewing them throughout the presentation, and then at the end of the webinar, we will get to as many questions as we can. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Sam to lead this webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, hello, everyone. My name is Sam Cotterall. I'm Director of Client Enablement at Verse, really sitting between our active users and the product, working on bringing innovation into the PPA management space and energy management in general. I come from over a decade of energy experience, first in DC, focused on energy and transportation policy, really relevant in today's PPA market. Moved up to New York with Bloomberg New Energy Finance and spent 7 years with the Bloomberg organization focused on energy transition. And before joining Verse, most recently was a senior consultant with Schneider Electric's Renewable Energy and Carbon Advisory team. Kind of a fun position for me to be in, as a number of my previous employers are mentioned in Gus's report. We're honored at Verse to be part of this Verdantix report and to have Gus here to share the work that he and his colleagues did on the innovation happening in the space from a technology perspective. So I'll let Gus introduce himself.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. It's great to be here today and to talk you through this kind of really exciting part of the market, looking at renewable energy, PPAs, and all that great stuff. So as an introduction, my name is Gus Brewer. I am an industry analyst in the net zero and energy transition team at Verdantix. For those of you who aren't familiar with Verdantix, we're an independent market research and advisory firm, and we specialize in software markets, particularly around sustainability, energy management, EHS and risk, and those kind of topics. As Sam mentioned, I was also the lead author on our Smart Innovators report looking at renewable energy procurement, which Verse was one of 12 participants in. So it's great to be here today and really excited to share some insights from our research. So with that said, I'll run through a quick agenda for the webinar today. So the first 4 sections I'll be talking you through, kind of focused around the insights from that report and the wider energy management market in general. So to start with, we'll be contextualizing the market and then diving a bit deeper into the state of renewable energy market. And then we'll be talking about those insights we found from our report. So looking at the software and innovation and where Verse and some of the competitors sit within this market. And then I'll leave you with some key takeaways before I hand over to Sam for a live demonstration of the Verse platform. And then, as Amber mentioned, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions or anything like that, please do pop them in the chat box, and hopefully we'll get back to them in a little bit. So let's start with some context first. So what we're looking at here is how organizations are currently prioritizing their decarbonization efforts. So we've pulled here an extract from our recent Verdantix Decarbonization Global Corporate Survey, and this gathers responses from over 350 sustainability leaders. And what this data is showing us is that firms clearly value or are placing more significant value on renewable energy procurement, with over 80% of firms seeing this as an important priority in the coming 12 months. And what this tells us is that renewable energy is no longer being treated as a secondary or perhaps a aspirational measure, but instead it's becoming central to how firms plan, finance, even operationalize their decarbonization strategies. I think if we had looked at this data 2, 3, perhaps even 4 years ago, it would have told a very different story. But what we're seeing now is a real shift from commitment and kind of aspirational targets to real implementation, and renewable energy really sits at the top of this. And so I think that really sets the scene for our discussion today. And we're looking at a market where renewable energy procurement is becoming much more of a mainstream activity embedded in kind of broader investment and operational planning. So to understand the renewable energy management market, it's important looking at kind of the broader energy management or the broader energy landscape in general first. So we see there are 5 core dynamics that are currently shaping corporate energy decisions right now. So firstly, we have energy price volatility. This has been and remains a key concern for the last 3 to 5 years, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when we saw oil and gas prices really surge up. I think European gas prices have increased tenfold since 2019 at their peak. So this is kind of a real issue and concern for corporate leaders now, and is kind of having a tangible impact on kind of financial decisions and so on. The second kind of key trend we see is grid constraints and instability. And these are really rising as things like renewable energy generation grows. So many regions are struggling with things like congestion, delays to interconnections, and reliability issues. We've already seen this happening in parts of Southern Europe caused by recent outages in Spain, Portugal, and France. And these kind of things seem to be occurring more and more these days. So it's important to keep a keen eye on this. We're also seeing regulatory mandates and building standards still remaining a concern. Firms face strong requirements around energy performance, emissions disclosure, renewable sourcing, all these kind of things. And even despite some regulatory pushback in the last 12 months, a number of these mandates and regulations still remain in place and are pressuring corporates. And then linking to that, there's also that pressure to decarbonize operations. So organizations have their sustainability mandates, their net zero targets. And again, we have seen pushback, but we still see a lot of companies moving forward with these, and they're facing a lot of internal and external pressure to show tangible progress on these targets. And finally, one that's perhaps more emerging at the moment is energy resilience and security. And what we've seen is this rise up to a board level priority. Geopolitical events, extreme weather events have all shown how critical, reliable, but also diversified energy can be, and how they can use that to build resiliency within their business. So what we're seeing here overall is a general shift from passive procurement in the past, where it was kind of thought about maybe once or twice in a year in energy management, to much more of a proactive stance towards organizations' energy management. And renewable energy really sits at the core of a lot of these management priorities. So those are some of the key challenges firms are facing and are shaping their priorities. But how are firms actually managing this on the ground today? So we see this occurring across 4 key levels. So at the base of our pyramid, we have hardware and infrastructure. So that's technologies like meters, building systems, and generation equipment that form the physical backbone of energy strategy. Next, we then have energy conservation measures. So things like efficiency upgrades, behavior changes, and process optimization. And then I think above that sit 2 kind of interesting sections. So we next have energy services. So that's traditionally been things like energy procurement, contracting, and management. And that's where firms have traditionally focused. But now we're seeing much more of a shift towards software and digital tools. And this is really where we're starting to see the innovation. So previously, services might have been responsible for energy management transformation. But as these technologies are advancing, it's more consistently the job of the software and the tools to do this, so that they can avoid things like costly consulting and other factors like this. And so we can say, whilst the foundations remain essential, it's software that's enabling organizations to optimize their renewable energy strategies And this is evolving continually and at a rapid pace at the moment. So when we think about energy management, power purchase agreements or PPAs have become quite a key mechanism to helping to source renewable energy directly from developers and suppliers. This is because they offer long-term price stability and a clear link to new renewable energy capacity. But in practice, they still come with kind of a lot of complexities, and only a small number of mature firms are equipped to manage these effectively in-house. So here, what we've done is map out some of the complexities that firms are facing right now. So I think market access and scalability is kind of one of the biggest challenges firms face. I would say PPAs have traditionally and typically been designed for larger energy buyers with more predictable consumption and also more predictable financial allocation for longer terms. And the size and sophistication has often excluded smaller or less mature firms. We also see difficulty with risk management as a key barrier. So long-term exposure to prices, generation, and counterparty risk demands require advanced modeling and oversight, which for a lot of firms it is really tricky to kind of deal with and manage themselves. Thirdly, we have tracking and accounting. So firms juggling multiple PPAs or across different regions, and it's hard to maintain accurate and consolidated data, as well as understanding if they're actually getting the correct output from the contracts they're signed. So really having a solid understanding of what you have and being able to track that and account that effectively is really difficult for a lot of firms. And then finally is expertise or a lack of. I think, put simply, commercial and legal knowledge is essential, but it's quite far and few between. And if you don't have an in-house procurement team or the likes, it's near on impossible to do yourself. So I'd say while PPAs are a cornerstone of renewable energy procurement and management, their complexity continues to limit broader participation, and it is often why it's slower in adoption. And it's kind of one of those reasons why software is becoming so important. So we wanted to contextualize the market there and what we're talking about, but now I want to look at the state of the renewable energy market itself. So to start with, I want to talk about PPA growth and what we've seen in the last 8 to 10 years. Clearly here, we can see that PPA demand has expanded dramatically in the last 10 years. In 2017, firms contracted 6.5 gigawatts of renewable capacity through PPAs. But as you can see here in 2023, that's all the way up to 46 gigawatt. So a 7-fold increase in 8 years clearly shows the kind of emphasis that corporates are putting on PPAs and their use here. And it really highlights the maturing of corporate renewable energy procurement and firms' confidence in this mechanism. On the left-hand side here, we can also see some data from our recent Verdantix energy transition survey. And this really reinforces that firms are planning to increase spend on offsite renewables with a 34% increase here in the next 5 years. So clearly pointing to strong continued growth in the market. So I think the bottom line here is that PPAs have risen in popularity massively in the last 10 years, and we do expect this trend to continue moving forward and renewable energy management and procurement to become an increasingly important topic. So next, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about policy shifts in both the US and and Europe, as these have significant bearing on energy management strategies, and clearly we're seeing a lot of change in the market at the moment. I think the most significant that kind of everyone knows about is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which poses a significant shift in US policy, and one that will directly impact renewable project development and in turn corporate PPAs. So if we look at the left-hand side here, so what has actually changed? I think probably the key point here is that there's now a shortened eligibility window for clean energy tax credits, giving developers less time to qualify, and then that'll compress project timelines. So to be eligible for tax credits, construction needs to start by July 4th next year, and then begin service by the end of 2027. There are also restrictions on foreign entity of concern, So that could remove some established suppliers from these markets, especially if projects have connections to foreign entities. One of the perhaps positives we do see from this is the accelerated tax depreciation, which lets clean energy developers deduct the full cost of eligible assets much faster. So in a year as opposed to 5, and that can help boost things like early cash flow, reducing taxable income and improving project returns in the short term. So those are some of the kind of black and white changes, but what are the likely impacts that we're seeing? Well, I'd say more generally, we're likely to see a slowdown in new project build-outs post 2027 with lower kind of tax breaks and the likes. Conversely, I think in the short term, we're likely to see kind of bottlenecks for projects as developers try to get these projects across the line as quickly as possible before those changes come into place. And then I think kind of looking out into the future, we're also likely to see higher domestic energy prices in the US as additional generation capacity slows down. I think probably the silver lining here is that this environment will push firms to strengthen analytical capabilities, so things like improving scenario modeling and being more strategic with their procurement practices and their management practices. As that uncertainty continues, firms will have to build their resiliency around how they manage their assets and how they manage their financial kind of vehicles. Sam, perhaps it would be great to kind of get your insights here. How are you at Verse seeing this impact already on your business?
Yeah, Gus, we're only 3 months into the post OBBBA world here in the United States, and we're already seeing a massive impact. I think first and foremost, it's been a kind of a moment of truth for corporate renewable energy programs. What are we going to do right now? We had a 10-year plan, maybe even a longer term plan. We don't have the luxury of time on our side anymore. So what we're actually seeing is really this is a call to action and an urgency driver for organizations that were in a procurement cycle or have been procurement minded in the past, where there is that internal comfort with a virtual power purchase agreement or PPAs in general. They maybe have some contracts under management already, have been flirting with going to market. Well, everyone's going to market now. So there are impacts of that too, with the shortened window of eligibility, that's a real constraint on qualified assets from a supply perspective. As you increase demand and supply is either constant or shrinking, what happens to price? We've seen some price inflation on the PPA strike price front. So definitely, a kind of call to arms here in the US, and a lot of companies that have commitments, have expertise, and are really going to market fast and for probably more than they were originally planning, at least in this shorter term. Now, what about the companies that were kind of on the bubble? We think we might want to do our first VPPA. Our goals weren't until 2030, so we hadn't acted yet. We've been purchasing RECs in the interim, thinking about when was the right time to go to market. Well, some of them have made that decision. It is the right time to go to market and may have the demand to do it alone. But we're also seeing this kind of safety in numbers mentality. We know about aggregated VPPAs and cohorts, but I think this is the most activity I've ever seen in my experience working in this market of companies coming together as industries, as frenemies, if you will, to say, hey, let's really focus on our peer group, our supply chain, and let's get maybe some of these companies that don't have the internal expertise or the load demand, the capacity to do this alone. Let's get together and let's learn from each other and kind of share some of this risk. So it's been really great to see industries and different verticals rally together to create these cohorts and think about doing something now rather than waiting for a 2030 or 2035 goal cycle to come in. And I think that is kind of one of those silver lining impacts that you were talking about of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those aggregated PPAs across, well, supply chains, industries is a really, really interesting point and definitely something we're seeing more of at the moment. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you for that insight.
Before we move on, Gus, we actually got a question from the audience. Thank you, Patricia. Her question was, are these impacts US based or are they global or both?
Yeah, and I think this one actually may have come in when you were sharing about the different contracted capacities, getting up to 46 gigawatts. So Gus, maybe I'll let you speak to the nature of that report.
Yeah. So those were global numbers I was sharing earlier. But I think if you were referring to this, I think this is certainly more US based. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We'll come on to some of the EU policy shortly as well, to see kind of what the impacts are there, because we have two kind of polarized approaches, I guess, at the moment to renewable energy. Well, so yeah, perfect. We can jump into it now. So it's like I said, it's a real contrast from the US to the EU right now. And I'd say that Europe's policy direction is much more supportive of renewable energy expansion. If we look at some of the key policies and mandates and initiatives, I think RED 3 is probably the one that stands out the most. So that raises the EU's renewable energy targets to 42.5% by 2030, and really kind of signals a clear path that renewables is going to be a big part of Europe's energy mix moving forward, and kind of pushing forward projects and the likes. I think Repower Europe also combines things like policy reform, funding, and also infrastructure measures to accelerate solar, wind, even storage deployment. So again, kind of very favorable policy. Um, we're also seeing things like proposed electricity market reforms in Europe. So doing so will kind of help in improving consumer protection and also industrial competitiveness and things like this. And then the last one here to touch on, the Affordable Energy Action Plan, came in after the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and that's just all about ensuring predictable frameworks and lowering energy costs for industrial firms and keeping that competitiveness within Europe. So I think, in contrast to US policies, these create much stronger policy support for corporate renewables. We see lower policy risk, clearer frameworks, and a growing market with lots of opportunities, making Europe a much more stable environment for these renewable energy investments today.
And that's great to see because Gus, I think a lot of like the US was a leader in corporate renewable energy procurement through VPPAs, from a timeline perspective, right? And we've seen that growth in our market here in the United States. And as companies have either satiated their demand here or expanded globally, having an environment with clear guidelines and incentives in Europe has certainly shown a lot of, or I guess dictated a lot of growth in that market, where companies that were focused on their U.S. procurement maybe in 2018 to 2020 have really turned their sights, or even later, turned their sights to Europe. And I think that some of the challenges on the supply and demand side and federal tax credit incentives are probably going to continue to push companies to look, not just in the US, but outside of our borders, or maybe increasingly look outside of our borders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the third and final important policy update or policy shift is the proposed greenhouse gas protocol scope 2 guidance updates that's being talked through right now with technical working groups, that's proposed to come in next year. And so there are three key proposed changes that I think will have the greatest impact on renewable energy or energy management in general. So the first one is a much narrower geographic boundary. So that's requiring firms to match renewable procurement more closely with the consumption location. So right now you could match somewhere in the US with Europe and it wouldn't matter, but they're trying to kind of narrow these boundaries down a little bit. Which yeah, I think makes total sense, but we'll see. And then we also have hourly accounting is the next proposed change. So shifting from our, annual matching down to hourly matching. And this is going to try or aim to drive greater precision, but also is going to require more data and verification requirements as you have to kind of match your procurement with your use. So another really interesting change. And then the third one is the use of residual mix factors. So effectively requiring firms to use stricter residual mix and that excludes already claimed electricity and would likely result in higher, more fossil fuel heavy emissions factors. And this is basically aimed at reducing double counting and really getting effectively showing the correct kind of what you're actually using as opposed to just aimless claims. And so I think generally these changes are really aimed at raising the bar for credibility within renewable claims. I think there's quite a conscious thought to avoid kind of aimless claims as much as we've seen with almost the carbon credit market, where it's kind of fallen off a little bit because of baseless claims in a lot of circumstances. And I think they're really trying to kind of improve the accuracy of these claims here. And so for kind of corporates and for firms themselves, what's this going to lead to? Well, you're going to need a lot more granular data, stronger tracking systems, and generally just better governance to stay compliant and credible under this proposed new framework. I guess the one important thing to note here is that these are proposed changes. So it's interesting to keep an eye out and see if these do come into place. But right now, these are kind of the signals of where the market looks like it's going. So definitely an interesting time for Scope 2 and for the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and we'll keep a keen eye on that one in the next year or so. So taking a step back, what's actually growing the focus on renewable energy management today? We think that 5 key forces stand out. So as we've already mentioned, price volatility is kind of the key one. Energy management's become much more of a financial metric than it was before. It used to be kind of, you think about it once and then it's done, but now it's much more of an active role you're playing with that. Next, we see sustainability mandates that I've already mentioned. So we have seen pushback, but things like CSRDs does still exist within the EU for a lot of companies, and net zero targets are still very relevant for a lot of people and a lot of companies and also their customers. So it's an important factor. Decentralized grids is also another interesting one. So this unlocks new ways for firms to buy renewable energy directly and reduces the dependence on kind of centralized utilities. And that increases the importance of these digital tools. Fourth, we're seeing much more standardization and market maturity from renewable energy management. So this wasn't a kind of massively tech and software led market 5 to 10 years ago, but it's becoming increasingly so. I think a great example of this is kind of contracting for PPAs. 5-10 years ago, this was all kind of one-off agreements, and now they're becoming much more standardized in the way that they're being entered. So an interesting time. And then finally, we have increasing energy consumption and rising energy demands. So here, corporates are turning to VPPAs and clean energy investments to secure future supplies and hedge against that price volatility, especially in an increasingly resource-constrained market, which I think Sam was alluding to earlier when he was talking about the kind of rush for PPAs happening in the US at the moment. So conversely, as the market matures, we're also seeing new risks appear, and firms should be aware of this when they think about their energy management. So market cannibalization is quite a big one. We're seeing a lot more of at the moment, where this can erode project values as renewables flood certain regions. We're seeing this increasingly in Europe, in California, and places like Spain, Germany, the UK, where they have high renewable penetration. As mentioned, we're already seeing a lot of regulatory uncertainty. You can see that by the kind of contradicting policies we have in Europe versus that of the US. Next, we're also seeing kind of integration and data challenges for a lot of firms. Firms often rely on fragmented systems or kind of where they can't ingest information quickly and don't have full visibility of the system. And this kind of creates a lot of issues for firms. And then finally, quite an interesting one, especially we saw a lot during our research into the renewable energy procurement software market, was the mismatch between ambition and actual capabilities. So firms often have kind of these exciting ambitions, but the tools available aren't necessarily there to develop and match the demands of the corporates. I think we saw that recently with 24/7 carbon-free matching, where 2-3 years ago that wasn't, you couldn't do that through software, but corporates were asking for it. But now the market's kind of caught up, and that is starting to become a big thing that firms can do. So really interesting to see how corporate demand really does drive the innovation in the space at the moment. But I think just being aware of these risks is really important for kind of energy management moving forward. Again, Sam, maybe if you have any kind of inputs from the risks that you guys are seeing, it'd be great to hear them.
Yeah, this is a fun segue into like the technology that you've been reviewing, or the technologies and companies working in the tech space focused on energy. With all of this uncertainty, without the luxury of time, especially here in the U.S. that we were talking about, I think it's an emphasis. It really emphasizes the need to have a dynamic view of the market, to be able to run scenarios and to be able to do so quickly, and with confidence. So, having a software that can run a discounted cash flow model on an updated VPPA price as you're in the middle of a negotiation in seconds rather than weeks from going to an internal or external financial consulting team, that's an advantage to be able to really visualize the capacity additions and think about what that means for the market cannibalization. What does that mean for my specific offer in my specific market? That's really important. And again, to be able to do so quickly, bringing these, the things that have typically been that companies have typically relied on external sources to provide, and frankly, not doing so on a quick timeline, to be able to bring those expertise in-house, with good data and the latest technology, I think is a way to manage a lot of these risks that you're talking about, Gus. Um, I'm seeing sorry, did you have something more to say on that front? I was gonna say I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat here, maybe a little clarification too. So
Yep,
uh,
I have to take questions now if that works.
yeah, so I think the first question is around cohorts. Yeah, it's definitely not the easiest way to procure. You've got multiple cooks in the kitchen, as they say. But there's definitely a something to be said for aggregating that demand, the credit ratings, that have that ability to go it together. Finding cohorts, I think what we've seen traditionally, on the supply chain side, led by a lead organization. I think a really good example of that was Walmart setting up the gigaton PPA, right? Maybe one of its first of its kind. And then industry groups where you and your peers get together to talk about what's happening in your industry. I think a really good example of that is the Charm Initiative in medtech and healthcare. These are like-minded companies working in the same industry, of varying sizes that are leveraging some of the larger companies' experience in the space to bring some of the maybe smaller companies or less experienced companies into the fold. So I know like the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council has been involved. SEBA, you mentioned SEBA, Aaron, in your question, definitely a great resource. But I think talking to the industry groups is a good place to start. And Sean, hey, good to see you. Do you know the decision timing for Scope 2? Well, the latest on that is this month. They are going to public comment. I believe it's a 60-day period where anyone and everyone can review the latest from the working group, and provide comment that they'll then take into consideration. So I don't know if we have any more clarity on when changes are actually going to happen, but there is progress on coming out of the working groups, as we go into this public consultation period. So that's the latest on GHGP updates.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. I think though those cohort PPAs is a really interesting one. I think another interesting thing we've seen is kind of software helping to educate stakeholders as well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to kind of contracting and things like that, really understanding what's actually going on and what you need to do and what your firm requires based on kind of education. So that's an interesting piece we see.
A really good point because with different levels of experience in a cohort, and with again a lot of cooks in the kitchen, just making sure you don't get lost, or your organization and your preferences don't get lost in the shuffle, is absolutely a place where software and third parties can help. That's a great point, Gus.
Yeah, awesome. Right, I will carry on. I want to leave some time for you guys at the end to make sure you can demo your software as well. So I'll get going. But so just to kind of explain the smart innovators we did. So that is our research report we did around renewable energy procurement software. And we did this by mapping 12 leading and emerging vendors supporting renewable energy sourcing, PPA management, and certificate tracking. We did this through demonstrations with each of the vendors, and then put that against a scoring criteria that we have, and we assessed against capabilities like market access, risk forecasting, data management, and tracking and verification and things like this, just to really understand how the market is evolving and what technologies are really shaping the future of renewable energy management. So if I go to this next one, I think we won't spend too long here because we can kind of unpack this in the next few slides. But what are some of the key findings of the research, and what does software help to do? So I think it helps in 4 ways. So one, through getting better risk forecasting, so consolidating the data, highlighting scenarios. It's a really important way that software can help. It also creates much better transparency and price transparency, which is a kind of a big issue with PPAs a lot of the time, allowing for things like benchmarking and real-time valuations. I think improving data understanding, so using language models, automation, can really help turn complex data and information and clarify that a lot. And then finally is that stakeholder alignment, which I think we were alluding to with the kind of cohort PPAs, and kind of aligning everyone, both internally if it's your own organization or if it's across a cohort, trying to align those stakeholders as well. And so what does the vendor landscape look like, and what types of vendors exist today? So when we look at the renewable energy management market, I'd probably say it's still a patchwork of capabilities rather than kind of one unified ecosystem. And we've categorized the vendors here into 3 main categories. So power purchase agreement software and firms, energy attribute management firms, and then energy management software more generally. And I'd say most vendors specialize in just one or perhaps 2 of these areas. And then that basically means firms are going to need multiple tools to get a complete picture. But what we found through our research is that that's starting to change. So you can see here we have Verse, obviously, and then NLX and Schneider Electric as some of the key vendors who stood out, who are working across all 3 of those areas. And typically, I would say that firms focus on energy management software as the kind of core pillar, and then it's renewable energy procurement as an additional benefit. But as this becomes more of an important part of the market, as we've seen with kind of renewable energy procurement and management driving up agendas, firms are paying increased attention to the PPA and the EAC side of it. And that's really becoming kind of a big topic for a lot of these vendors. And so we expect that convergence trend to accelerate in the coming years, especially kind of leading towards platform-based solutions that bring together procurement, certification, and then performance management as well under one kind of unified platform. And so in our research, what were those key areas of innovation that we saw? So I've highlighted 6 of the most interesting areas that we found. I think firstly is the data quality and consistency piece. What was clear during the analysis was that to be a leading vendor, you've got to be able to ingest that data straight away, connecting generation, consumption, certification, all without the need for manual data inputs. That's got to be done automatically for firms. They can't be relying on kind of manual data uploads and things like this anymore. It just doesn't quite cut it. Providers are able to offer dynamic platforms that link buyers and also sellers, developers together, and improve the market transparency here to reduce the barriers to entry so firms can really understand what's actually going on and what price they should be paying. What's important here as well is that vendors that were leading were kind of offering against across different markets and also different geographies. So I think that's a really important aspect of it as well, and kind of having that wide reach is really important. I think the actionable intelligence and scenario modeling often kind of fall into one bucket, where kind of the data ingestion is vital, but you also need to be able to provide key actionable insights with that data. And so I think the scenario modeling is kind of one of the key innovations that we saw, where that data was turned into intelligence. So vendors have the capabilities to run kind of multiple scenarios, multiple strategies to understand and forecast things like cost, carbon outcomes, financial metrics, all these kind of things. And these are things that used to be done by consultants and it would take weeks to do, which now can kind of be done at a click of a button. And that's a really exciting innovation. Next is the use of kind of AI tools. And I think large language models was kind of the key innovation we saw here. So almost ChatGPT style LLMs, but helping to diffuse the noise and really understand the energy data and be able to kind of ask it to produce you reports that would have taken kind of weeks to make before. And then finally is that integration piece. So systems that sit in silo are no use to anyone. You need to be able to kind of connect your renewable energy data to your financial metrics, to your ESG platform, to whatever it might be to provide that holistic view of energy management. And so overall, I think effectively that takes these platforms from very manual to much more of a connected, intelligent, and predictive platforms that are really helping with both procurement and then management of renewable energy. And so I just two more slides to cover quickly here, just talking key takeaways. And so I firstly wanted to highlight some best practices. So I think when you're thinking about going into your renewable energy procurement or management process, it's important to think about a few things before you start, sorry. So I think you need to clarify your strategy before procurement. So know what your goals are. Is that cost? Is that decarbonization? Is that having additionality impact? The second one is selecting the right procurement model for you. So are you looking for a PPA? Are you looking for a green tariff? Are you just looking for energy attribute certificates? Thirdly is building in flexibility and scalability. So as we've seen, policies can change massively and are shifting kind of constantly. So being adaptable and being flexible is a really kind of important part of your energy management. And then finally is just aligning stakeholders. So there's lots of different teams at play here. You've got finance, sustainability, procurement, facilities managers, operations, and aligning them from the outset is really important. And then just one more slide for me before I do hand over to Sam, and hopefully do leave him enough time to cover his section.
We got plenty. Don't worry about it, guys.
Awesome. So what should you look for in software, and what are kind of the key areas of renewable energy management software? And so we've broken this out into 5 key areas. So I think firstly, market coverage. So as I already mentioned, access to multiple regions, access to multiple contract types, suppliers is really important. Next is those risk analysis tools. So things like robust forecasting, scenario modeling capabilities is vital to really understand and get a really solid picture of your energy management situation. Third is that data ingestion piece. I think this is almost a non-negotiable. It needs to be automated, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be happening kind of for you without you having to spend all your time doing that. Fourth is thinking about the AI capabilities that allow for real-time insight generation, again, through things like forecasting and scenario analysis, and kind of moving beyond the buzzwords and really actually having kind of tangible impacts. And then finally is that kind of integration with existing systems. So ensuring renewable energy data informs core business decisions and isn't just kind of siloed on the side. So I think it's a really interesting and exciting time for renewable energy management, and there's certainly kind of lots of innovation happening in the space at the moment. But that is everything I wanted to cover today. So I will now hand over to Sam, who will talk you through Verse's offering, and you hopefully see the software live in action.
Definitely see it live in action. And I'm not going to lie, I wish I could do a little side by side on the screen here and leave this slide up while I go through the platform, because it's such a good slide and really speaks to what software should be, and what we're really endeavoring to do at Verse. So I'm going to steal the screen from you, send that request, or if you can just drop it, that'd be great. I'm going to share mine. Thanks for bearing with us through the transition, folks. Yeah, so did that work? No.
We're seeing a PowerPoint Verse overview. Is that?
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Um, Yeah, so again, if you had that slide up, we were thinking about how data flows in, how it's managed, avoiding silos, not having your renewable procurement program be sidelined or an afterthought, but having it really be part of that actionable decision making. And I think a lot of this comes down to that holistic view of energy. So at Verse, and I promise I'll get into the software. I just wanted to lay a little groundwork first. At Verse, we're really thinking about a holistic energy cost intelligence platform, starting with your load. So let's, connect via API to your utilities, understand how your facilities are using energy. Let's use those inputs to create a plan. Do we have any, renewable supply agreements in place, whether it's PPAs, VPPAs, green tariffs, RECs strips, financial products, whatever it might be. How can I consider where I am today when thinking about where I want to be tomorrow or next year or 2030 or beyond? Let's think about the costs. What does it mean to get there? How do I evaluate these offers? And then, of course, moving into more of that operate side. So I have, I know my load, I know my supply agreements. And where we're going to spend most of our time today, most of the rest of our time today is focused on the VPPA side. I think that was a huge part of Gus and Verdantix report, so I really want to keep on theme here. But important to note that that is one of the many elements of corporate energy. So thinking about everything, having all of those data together, so that you can think about your risk exposure. Where am I long? Where am I short? What can I do about it? Those are the questions that we, really want to build an organization's expertise so that they can answer those. And you can think about, do I want to hedge against price? Do I want to hedge against volatility? What's an outcome that looks good for my organization? So with that, I'm going to shift over. And can you just confirm that you're now seeing my browser?
Yep,
Got you.
Sweet. All right. Thank you. Welcome to Aria. So this is Versus Energy Cost Intelligence Platform. As you can see, that wheel that I just showed in PowerPoint, exists in app form here. So really bringing all of those previously siloed information sources together into one area. So Data Hub is where we're pulling in, market data, emissions data, pricing, etc. We do have, to Gus's point, the capability to leverage an energy trained LLM to answer questions. We can think about running a discounted cash flow model on a new offer, or think about it. We can do it in seconds here. We can take the information that you've put into the platform on load and supply, on your goals, and think about where we are from a cost perspective, renewable percentage, real emissions, and carbon-free electricity. But what we're going to focus on really today is that what we call Portfolio Insights, which is the VPPA management platform. I think it was but we were really proud to have it highlighted in the Verdantix report as a place where we're an innovator. So I'm excited to show you what that innovation looks like. This is our demo org. So so if you see a number that looks a little weird, just know that these are based on real world PPAs, but we've of course anonymized and resized and repriced the information for the protection of clients, and so keep that in mind. First and foremost, let's harness the data that our assets are creating. Let's bring it all into one place. Let's do it globally. So Gus and I had talked about the different dynamics between Europe and the U.S. Really, Gus did, but it is important to be able to pull all of that global information together. As you can see here, we do have North America and European projects represented. We have a Canadian project too, so Canada, the US, and this Sugar Magnolia. You'll notice a musical theme here between Verse, Aria, and our project names in our demo org. This is a Spanish asset. So let's bring it all together. Let's normalize for currency. If I'm working in the EU, I want to do euros. If I'm working in the US, I want to see what the dollar value of my Spanish asset is. Really easy here. Again, taking that spreadsheet work, that updating FX info data out of here. But let's start answering questions. So first and foremost, I need to see how my assets have performed. That's what you're seeing across this solid line. We did stop ingesting real data here at the end of 24 to demonstrate the backcast ability of our projects here. So this is what we call our best available estimate. Leveraging machine learning, real weather data, real pricing data, real contract structures. Am I settling day ahead or real-time market? Do I have a cap, collar, discount to market, strike or settlement structure? So let's ingest all of that into our backcast analysis here. And then I think what's increasingly important in these volatile markets is a new approach to the forecasting. So the dashed line is that best available estimate backcast. The dotted line is your forecast. Verse has a proprietary methodology for forecasting. I think it's standard industry approach is to use that 8760 the developer gave you before they even put steel into the ground, and pair that with a fundamental forecast updated twice a year. That's a really great way of thinking about a project's contract length NPV. Probably not the best way to think about next month, next quarter, next year, next couple years when you're thinking about real cash flows. So you leverage machine learning modeling for generation, updating that expected 8760 on a monthly basis as real world conditions change, ingesting prices from ICE and really using explanatory variables through our machine learning model to say, okay, how does ICE settle historically compared to the actual market, or what were the ICE predictions and how did they deviate from the actual settlements? What were the explanatory variables? What's happening today with those explanatory variables to get just a better view of that shorter term price forecast so that we can just be dangerous with that short term cash flow modeling. So all of that here. I want to jump in and think about like, okay, I'm managing these assets. I get questions from my corporate leadership. I'm sitting here in the U.S., so I'm gonna favor our Graceland project here which is in ERCOT. I need to be able to answer questions quickly. What should I be thinking about for 2026? Boom, 2 clicks. Well, here's our net spend. Here's our expected generation. I can answer these questions very quickly. I can come down here and think about, okay, yes, these lines are great, but I want the real numbers. So I have, the month over month revenue, gross spend, generation, EACs, dynamic capture rate, and of course, the details for all of my projects, when they come online, when they come offline, strike price, settlement points, etc. Then let's think about like this real world asset management asset manager and what I'm thinking about. Well, I'm thinking about my budget from last year and how I'm performing against it this year. I'm thinking about my budget next year, and really trying to be a good steward of corporate finance and give them numbers that I'm confident in, but also keep score and say how did I do against the forecasting, or how am I doing year to date against the forecast that you're giving me. So if I extend this again, and then I look at, okay, full year 2025 to full year 2026, I can actually go into a compare mode here. And this is the same forecast, but let's say that I made a forecast back in January. So I can click on that and say, okay, we're gonna use this BAE as kind of like that year to date, because that is that backcast. So let's see how the forecast from January compared to the forecast update as of last week, October, and then let's see how that deviates going forward. We're seeing that the forecast for this 2-year period, keep in mind this is a 2-year period, has changed. We've increased the expectations for net spend by about 11.5%, a little over 11.5% from forecast to forecast. we can do this on a month-over-month basis, year-over-year basis, really just giving you an immediate insight into what's happening in the real market, how forecasts are changing dynamically, and what that means for your expected spend. And we can say, okay, some of that deviation is due to generation, but let's be honest, a lot of it's due to the changing price environment. I just got the 5-minute warning, so I'm gonna go into hyperdrive here. Let's think about how assets are performing. So I'm gonna just go back to this global view. I got to go to real data here. So let's look at full year 2024 across all my assets. I just want to think about how Sugar Magnolia is doing. This is an invoice validation dashboard that's gonna take all of your validated invoices, automatically done through the ARIA platform. Let us know if there are any discrepancies found. And what we can do here is either look, year over year, month, or by asset. We can immediately, if we see, a discrepancy in an invoice, we can click into here. This will tell me which invoices have discrepancies, what the discrepancies are. I can export this, send it to my counterparty and say, hey, let's fix this before I pay this invoice. Because, instead of waiting 30 days for an invoice validation, we're doing it, we're doing it in the platform on just an immediate turnaround here. So then let's say I want to dive into one of those invoices. And I'm going to try to leave some time for Q&A here. But I'm going to jump into, let's go Strawberry Fields. I'm feeling the Beatles today. Let's find, I know that there is a discrepancy in this August forecast. Where did that discrepancy occur? Well, here is exactly what those discrepancies were. I can hover over here and see that there is a duplicate hour. I'm actually owed over $8,000 based on these errors, and there's actually a missing hour here. I can jump in, and I'm gonna actually jump into Graceland here to show you, because ERCOT's a fun volatile market. I can show you on this, exactly what's happening with my actual generation, but also how it compares to modeled generation. So we're not just thinking about data errors. I think processing data errors is relatively table stakes. A lot of companies can do it internally, even though it takes a lot of time to pull in the different APIs and market data and compare. But something cool that we're doing is looking at the model generation compared to the actual generation and saying, okay, based on pricing, like here's a nice price spike in ERCOT. Let's see what happened with my generation during that price spike. Yeah, this actually wasn't the best result for us. This wind asset wasn't generating, as it looks like, solar was coming offline here in ERCOT around 7:45. Unfortunately, yeah, this wasn't the most beneficial to my net spend, but it's really nice to know what's happening on my with my generation and how that relates to pricing. 2 minutes left. I don't know if we're gonna save some time for questions. So apologies there. That was the whirlwind tour. Reach out if you wanna take a deeper dive here.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam. And we addressed quite a few questions in real time, so I think that is fine too. There are a couple other questions in here, and if we don't get to yours, we will have someone follow up with you to address those questions, because we've only got 1 minute left. So we'll just hit one of the questions that did come in. And like Sam said, if you have any questions about ARIA, the Verse platform that you just saw, feel free to visit verse.inc and request a demo, and we can dive deeper into what you just saw. So the final question in the last minute that we've got is, what's the single most important software capability for energy management? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can take a first stab at that if that works, Sam.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an interesting question. I think it's hard to say that there's probably one capability that's more important or the most important. What I do probably think is a really important starting point is kind of data ingestion and understanding usage and requirements and things like that. And I think that's probably a bare minimum that you need and you expect from these energy management platforms like Verse. So I think because that's kind of the foundation and the kind of the architecture behind all of these platforms, I think without kind of solid base credentials there, you kind of you need that. So I think I'd probably go with kind of data management, data ingestion, those kind of things. But Sam, I'll let you have a go as well if you'd like.
No, that's great. I'll build on that. I'll do a little yes and. So yeah, I think data ingestion is super important. So from automatically processing the invoices that you're getting from your renewable developer to being able to instantly look at. So we're actually tying into the data historian platforms of renewable assets. So telemetry, real-time data flowing into our platform. So when you get that invoice, we can like immediately see how does it compare to the metered data. We're using the on-site weather data to optimize our modeling. So it's really cool to see what we can do with data when it comes automatically and is actually usable. So I think that's a huge piece and it leads into what I would say is like that forecast confidence. There's been one way of doing it for a long time, and it's that stale, not evolving 8760 and a fundamental forecast, which again is really good for a 15-year NPV, but isn't designed for again that next month, next quarter, next year cash flow. So taking a next gen approach to modeling, whether it's load, whether it's PPAs, and thinking about what that means for my organization, if I can be just that much better at tightening a range of outcomes than what the traditional standard methodology looks like. I think that's really important.
Amazing. And with that, we're at time. I want to give an extra special thank you to Gus for all of the amazing insights and the entire Verdantix team for all the work that went into that report. If you would like a copy of Gus's report, check out our website. We'll also be following up with an email and a link to a free version of that report. And so thank you, Gus, for being here and for all of your effort. And thank you, Sam, for creating a great presentation and content. And with that, we will bid you adieu. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been
Thank
great.
you.